Metal Gear Rising Revengeance has been on my backlog ever since it came out, and I'm glad that I finally took the time to play it. But it wasn't easy for me to get through. While it was an overall enjoyable experience, I struggled and cursed through half the game, and I wanted to play something else most of the time. I understand that this is a rather divisive game due to the tonal shift in terms of both the genre and presentation when compared to the rest of the Metal Gear franchise, but my problem with the game stems only from the gameplay. Part of it probably comes from myself having misguided expectations, but I do wish that some things were better. Metal Gear Rising takes place 4 years after the events of Metal Gear Solid 4, making this chronologically the latest entry in the timeline. Cybernetic enhancements are now commonplace, and the private military companies are just as prevalent as before, only under different names now. Everyone's favorite cyborg ninja, Raiden, has joined the private security group Maverick, but he botches his latest job to protect an important political figure. Raiden gives chase, only to lose an arm, lose an eye, and utterly fail the mission. But his spirit is far from broken. After recovering from his injuries and with a new powerful body, he's out to track down the terrorist organization that defeated him, while uncovering a massive government conspiracy along the way. It sounds like a weird thing to say this, but in my opinion, Metal Gear Rising does fairly well for itself despite having pretty much no connection with the rest of the series. So there's Raiden as the star character, obviously, and you've got the Geckos and Metal Gear Ray is in there, but that's about it. There is one more Metal Gear character who shows up towards the end, and Raiden's family is briefly mentioned, but no other characters are in the game. Solid Snake and Otacon do get small mentions in optional codec conversations, but it's crazy to me that there isn't a stronger connection for a series that's so well known for its convoluted stories and lore. I will say that the game does make a fair attempt at connecting its gameplay to earlier Metal Gear titles, with things like the optional codec calls that I just mentioned, as well as optional stealth sections to thin out the enemy numbers before engaging with a group proper. Nice little touches that aren't needed, but they don't get in the way of the rest of the game, and they help establish the familiar Metal Gear staples. As for the story of Metal Gear Rising itself, it is absolute pure schlock, and I love it. Everything about this game, from the character designs to the action to the dialogue, it's all cranked to 11.
Like I said, kids are cool, Jack, and I'm very in touch with my inner child.
If you thought that the Metal Gear series got absurd before, then you gotta check out Rising for yourself. Now, if you're here mainly for a quality story, and I know that's a big factor in most Metal Gear games, you're probably going to be disappointed. It's not a bad story by any means, I like the characters and the way that their motivations are presented, but it is very goofy and it can be hard to take seriously. As long as you allow yourself to have an open mind with this game, then it can be a really fun story to go through. The presentation is great. The environments and character designs carry with them a look that fits in the Metal Gear universe, while still having a feel all its own. For example, Metal Gear Solid 4 also featured a modern urban environment in its third chapter, but nothing quite like this. I especially love how the heads-up display during the introductory mission uses a health bar similar to Metal Gear Solid 4. But when Raiden obtains his new body, then that too changes to have its own identity. As far as the general look of the game goes, Metal Gear Rising does a really great job, but it quite possibly could be the soundtrack that really steals the show. Just like the rest of the game, the music goes into overdrive in terms of the over-the-top absurdity, with the singer screaming the lyrics at the top of his lungs alongside insane guitar riffs and drum beats, and it helps match the mood of the action that's going on. But it's not just the soundtrack itself, rather it's the way it changes to match the battles. It'll pump up gradually as a fight progresses, and different parts of a song will transition into each other and back again. Such as here, when Raiden cuts up this Metal Gear in slow motion. Listen for how the song goes into a special guitar solo just for this moment. By making the music dynamic alongside the action, the game is giving the player another layer to immerse themselves in this world and get lost in the insanity, in a good way. But the magnificent cherry on top is when you first hear the song Rules of Nature. It comes so out of nowhere and it's brilliant. Keep in mind that the boss fight has been going on for a couple minutes already, and up to this point there have been no vocals. So for Raiden to intercept the arm of the Metal Gear and then to have that accentuated by is just perfect. This moment sets the scene for the rest of the game, and it does it so well. And each of the preceding boss fights also carry this aspect about them, the music playing dynamically alongside the fight, which helps make these parts of the game so wonderful and memorable. But, like I said at the start, I'm not entirely thrilled with the gameplay. A lot of it feels very automatic. The Ninja Run, for example, is the game's version of sprinting, and it allows Raiden to quickly vault and climb obstacles, as well as deflect bullets while running. I appreciate the game trying to keep the action fast and removing platforming from the equation when it's not needed, but I also found myself tripping over the environment in ways that I didn't want to. I'd end up climbing over stuff or automatically jumping in the air just because I got too close to a box. It's not necessarily a deal breaker, but I'm not a big fan of the feature. Worse yet, however, is the game's excessive auto-aim. It doesn't happen terribly often, but I'll occasionally run directly towards an enemy, only to slide in the complete wrong direction when I'm ready to attack. It's the most baffling thing. When an enemy is locked onto, that no longer becomes an issue, but then you lose control of the already limited camera and leave yourself vulnerable to off-screen enemies. Half of the battle feels like it's with this game's controls, while the other half is with the camera. The moment I realized this was going to be a problem was with the first boss fight. The camera wants to focus on the nearest weak point, which is either one of the legs or the head. It can be a headache when you're going after one target and the game's trying to pull you towards another. Every once in a while, the camera will also be forced into an awkward corner that's difficult to negotiate with. None of this will hamper the player too badly on the normal difficulty, but each step above that makes the game more unforgiving and in ways that don't necessarily feel fair. My biggest complaint is probably the game's parry system. Raiden's only defensive option is to block with his sword, which is done by pressing the light attack button and moving towards an enemy at the same time, in response to their oncoming attack. This is a bit of a problem not only in practice, but even just in theory, because like any typical action game, you're likely going to spend the majority of your time moving towards an enemy and pressing the light attack button anyway. I couldn't get a good feel for the timing of blocking in the middle of combos, and I quickly figured that it couldn't be done. That Raiden needs to be in a neutral state in order to defend himself. I thought this was a terrible idea since it ruins the pacing of the game, but so be it. To make matters worse, I could not manage to block any attack from the larger enemies. After a few deaths against the geckos, I concluded that some attacks were unblockable, which is stupid since Raiden was able to deflect a Metal Gear, but whatever, it's a video game, it is what it is. I spent a good chunk of the game relying on hit and run tactics in order to wear down the enemy while keeping myself safe, and it was miserable. Well, it turns out that I was doing it all wrong. You can parry in the middle of combos, and pretty much every attack in the game can at least be blocked, if not parried. But I didn't realize this until the boss fight against Monsoon. For this battle, the game forces you to master the parry system, such as blocking from different directions quickly, taking on longer strings of hits, and dealing with attacks that have awkward timing. It's an excellent way for the game to teach you all the mechanics you need to know in a single battle. But the problem is that this battle is halfway into the game. By this point, I had already fought Wolf, Mistral, and Grodd, all of which were incredibly frustrating because I just assumed that most of their attacks couldn't be blocked. But that couldn't be further from the truth. Hell, even Metal Gear Ray's foot stomps can be blocked, but who would ever think to try that the first time through? The game does offer a tutorial on blocking from the outset, however, it's only against simple, humanoid opponents and in a very controlled environment. As far as I can tell, the game never makes it a point that the player can be very aggressive with their blocking, instead leaving it as simply the keystone of your defense. In fact, this is immediately followed by an explanation that not every attack can be parried. I've said it before that I don't necessarily want my hand held in a video game, but I don't typically like trial by fire either. I feel like Metal Gear Rising could have done a little more to properly explain its mechanics. The core of the game, the actual combat and the game's combos, is okay, but I never felt compelled to go beyond the basic stuff. It's a similar complaint I have with God of War, especially the older games, but the newer one isn't too far from this either. You've got a couple of good moves, and that's it. Most of the time, it's best just to mash triangle, especially once you've unlocked the polearm weapon. Also, maybe it's just me, but I wish the game were more clear about the moves list. You can purchase new attacks as you proceed through the game, but you'd have no way of knowing how to do them unless you pause the game and access the help menu. It sounds obvious in retrospect, but I had no idea about this until long after I had completed the game, and then a friend pointed it out to me. Either way, mashing triangle works well enough. But if you were determined to take the game's depth further, then it seems like there's more room for that as well. After I had completed the game and talked about it with others, I finally decided to give it another go, this time on the hard difficulty. With a more proper understanding of how this game is meant to be played, I had a ton more fun, and so much about its design philosophy started to fall into place for me. Metal Gear Rising has a stand your ground and keep punching kind of approach to the combat, where a successful block is meant to immediately lead to more attacks. At times, it can feel like a button masher, but it's also really fun and creative during the better moments. Finally, it's worth bringing up the 2 DLC expansions that were released for free, each one containing a new playable character. The first features the samurai Jetstream Sam. This guy is, in my opinion, a massive improvement over Raiden's playstyle. He still has the ninja run similar to Raiden, however it doesn't leap obstacles or jump in the air automatically. Instead, Sam gets a double jump and an air dash, both of which drastically opens up his mobility and in more interesting ways. Furthermore, his heavy attacks can be charged, in a similar way to Raiden's giant machete, however fully charging one of Sam's attacks can lead to completely different moves, giving him a wider arsenal of attacks. This guy's awesome to play as, and although his stages and bosses are repeated from the main game, it's still a ton of fun and a great addition for free. The second DLC features the robotic wolf that Raiden fights against early on. This character isn't nearly as unique as Sam is. He does get throwing knives, but they're not that big of a deal, and in fact, there isn't much of a reason to do anything other than his 3-hit heavy attack combo. It does great damage, comes out fairly quickly, and it has huge range. So yeah, all you're gonna do is triangle, 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 and occasionally square to do the parry. It is a bit of a fun novelty to be able to play as an animalistic character instead of a humanoid one, but he's not really anything special. However, this DLC does feature an exclusive boss fight with a pretty cool mechanic behind it, and that alone makes this worth checking out. Both of these could have easily sold for a few dollars each, but the fact that they're free and that they provide some insight into the game's backstory is a really nice treat. I do wish that the optional VR missions that you can unlock in the DLC would be added to the main menu alongside Raiden's VR missions in the base game, but that is strangely not the case. Instead, you need to play those DLC campaigns over again from the beginning if you want to try their VR missions again. Metal Gear Rising puts me in a really weird spot. I want to like this game a lot. Everything about its presentation is wonderfully fun and exciting to experience, but the gameplay just does not gel with me on too many points. When you do manage to pull off a successful parry, it's only okay, it's not immensely satisfying. I mean, slicing up enemies to ribbons is fun and all, but after the 100th time, it does start to get a little old. At least it did for me. Now, this is by no means a bad game, and I know that it's very well beloved, and I can clearly see why. This game bleeds its own unique brand of style, and during its best moments, it's extremely fun. But for me, I just couldn't quite get into it. I would still recommend others to give it a try if they're interested in it, but it's not a game that I can see myself coming back to. Thanks for watching my review on Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance.